Thank you. Am I unmuted now?
No, you're all set, Pam. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And welcome. I'm so happy to be here. And I'll just let you know, we have had the craziest weather for the last couple of hours. So it's bright right now, but you may see the screen change. Not much I can do about the light show outside my window here. Today, I'm going to talk about irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. And as is usually the case when I make a presentation at this conference, what I'm trying to do is summarize a lot of information into a short period of time to give a good overview of the topic. So a year or two ago, I can't remember exactly when, I created it's a 6 or 7 module course on IBS that gives a much deeper dive into each of the things that we're going to cover during today's workshop. So if you have some interest in knowing more, there's a lot more than what I'm going to tell you, but I think I'm going to give you a pretty good idea of the causes, what the actual symptoms are, what to do, and that sort of thing. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. I'll try to talk as fast as I can to cover the material, but slow enough so that you can understand what I'm saying. So just by way of, a little bit about me, my company is Wellness Farm Health. We've been working with people for 26 years to sort out their messy health situations. And usually one of the sources of the problem that people have with their health is just not really understanding how to look at the medical literature and the causes of their conditions and all of the things impacting their current state of health. So that's what we really work with people on. And we've worked with a lot of people who have irritable bowel for a long time. And I have to tell you, my first few years that I saw people like this and tried to help them who have IBS, I was a little bit frustrated because I didn't learn much in school about what this condition is really all about. So I had to do a lot of self-study and looking into this on my own, and I'm going to share with you what I have found. So I'm going to share my screen. And, some of you who know me know I'm not the most technical person in the world, but so far I've been able to do this without much problem. So here we go. I actually managed to do this well. All right, so let's just talk about some general things about irritable bowel. It's estimated that between 10 and 20% of adults have some kind of symptom associated with irritable bowel, as many as 45 million people. The incidence is 1 to 2% in the population every year, and it accounts for between 20 and 50% of referrals to gastroenterologists. Now, if you're looking at this information the way that I look at this, you might be saying to yourself, how can it be 10 to 20% or 20 to 50%? What accounts for these wide ranges? And I'll get to that in a minute, but I'll just say this, for the time being. A lot of things are called IBS that aren't IBS. And when we started learning the difference between IBS and not IBS, we had much better success in terms of helping people. The condition is common but poorly understood, and I kind of, what I just said alludes to this. Some of the common misunderstandings is that the disease is uncommon, but a small number of people make a lot of noise about it. It's actually quite common, and it affects a large number of people. Another myth is that it affects mostly women or only young women. It affects women of all ages, and it does affect men as well. Another thing that people say is it's not a legitimate medical problem. It is a legitimate medical problem. And if you have IBS, you know that it's a medical problem. You're not imagining what's going on at all. Somebody else might say it's a disease made up by drug and supplement companies. It's a form of disease mongering. So we'll call some everyday gastrointestinal symptoms IBS, and then we can prescribe supplements and drugs for it. To an extent, there's some truthfulness in that, but that implies that everybody doesn't really have IBS and that there is no such thing. And that's absolutely not true. There's a very specific set of symptoms with very specific causes that associated with IBS, and we'll tease that out during this time that I'm going to be with you. And then people will say it's a new condition. It's not an old condition, a new condition, it's an old one. It's been going on for a long, long time. I think what's happened is some things seem new because we hear more about them. And one of the wonderful things, kind of a blessing and a curse, is that we have access to so much information now, and everybody talks about everything now. So it tends to amplify the importance of some things or the incidence of some things. But I can assure you that there is such a thing as IBS. It is not new. It affects people of all ages. There are a lot of things that aren't IBS that are called IBS, and that's part of what leads to some of these misunderstandings, and we will figure that out here. IBS affects both men and women of all ages, nationalities, and race. The most common incidence is in adolescents and adult women, most commonly affected. Women are more likely to develop IBS than men and are more likely to seek healthcare services to address it, which may be the reason why we think that more women than men have it. If men were as inclined to seek healthcare for conditions like IBS, maybe that would equal the playing field. In our own business here, we have seen far more women than men with IBS, but again, I'm not really sure about this because of the reluctance of men to seek care for it. In fact, only 30% of people with IBS ever visit a healthcare provider for it at all. And there are some reasons for it. One is that sometimes the symptoms are pretty mild. Often they can be treated with over-the-counter medications, which relieves symptoms but doesn't solve the problem. So while that may be a way to get through the week until you talk to somebody about it, it's not a plan. And most people with IBS would tell you that having done that for a while, if they actually had IBS, it just led to kicking the can down the road to be dealt with later. People can be embarrassed about discussing symptoms. Another thing that affects it is that when some of the symptoms of IBS can be very concerning, and the dread of finding out something terrible keeps people from seeking medical care. I would say that that's gotten worse lately, that the medical system has made itself so uninviting that people are afraid to go. And I sometimes have to I don't try to talk anybody into anything, but I sometimes have to tell people, look, I don't like a lot of what goes on in medical offices either, but there are times when we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you might be really frustrated and suspicious about conventional care right now, but you really do need to see somebody to figure this out, right? And then financial reasons can sometimes impact it as well. So one of the difficulties, I mentioned this in the first slide, in determining like the percentage of people who have IBS and that sort of thing, is that there are so many different criteria applied to diagnosing it. And the majority of people don't see doctors. So we have to hypothesize about some things. If symptoms are going to develop, they usually develop in the late teens or early 20s. The prevalence peaks in 30s and 40s, and it tends to go away in the 60s and 70s. And I have a hypothesis about why that is, which I'll share with you.